Gur mágat Charlie agus ar dúspáirde bhhailm ó bhéchas a gháil de Joe agus an Christe tá freigrach as agrú na scoile seo as ácht an cur bheileh a nocht. I mthóram is scoil táchtach é seo a thaobh cuasaí políteachta agus sóisialta na tíre agus gach éon bliain pléimiid rudí táchtach agus gan áras rudí fad tíreamach agus buine man tanamhas tapca an bhentíos líon in níag le bléine agus táim cé go bhfuilm gnóthach cosúla a lán daoine eile táim seo a ríist im líine. And I just want to thank you for the invitation. And also, just before I start, to remember this evening a very good colleague and friend of mine who I know you honoured yesterday, the late Noel Whelan. We shared many years together as members of Fianna Fáil in the earlier days before he liberated himself in terms of broader political opinion and independent thought. But we once sat on a commission for the renewal of Fianna Fáil. And I asked the General Secretary, can you find out what year that was in? And he kind of said rather cynically, sounds like after some major electoral defeat that you set up a commission like that. I think it was 1992. And my sense of Noel always was that he was an ideas man, an ideas person who kept coming up with new ideas and was busy. And that's why he loved schools like this, and he would have been busy around developing and provoking new ideas and thoughts. At that stage, in 1992, he was proposing the abolition of the common structure. Now, you can imagine how radical that was at the time. It got to the Commission report. It didn't get too far beyond that in the end of the day, and I was quite supportive of him. And that's the kind of radical thinker he was well before his time. And we will miss him, and to Sinead and young Seamus, our thoughts are with them on a week like this, and for the school in particular. 21 years ago, people went to the polls in the only all-Ireland referendum in our history. The core point of that vote was to agree a shared vision for how we could overcome divisions, work together, and put to one side the constant focus on constitutional issues. It's an important point. That was one of the objectives of that referendum, was to deal with the constitutional issue. And there was a common understanding that the insecurity and suspicion caused by talking only about the constitutional future of Northern Ireland was destructive to all communities. The basic strategy was to find ways to avoid pushing people to constantly take sides and to focus on the issues which matter to people in their daily lives. No one was to be forced to abandon or disrespect their beliefs about the best constitutional arrangements for Northern Ireland, but these beliefs would no longer be allowed to define every element of life. The wisdom of this has been confirmed yet again in the past 2 years, where we have seen a return to partisan manoeuvring or fears about the core status of Northern Ireland. At a time when there is an unprecedented threat to the economy of Northern Ireland and we face the reintroduction of divisive barriers, the people of Northern Ireland have been left without a voice. And we have seen the two largest parties playing to their bases, their electoral bases, on long-term status issues, with rapidly shrinking common ground. The invitation for this session asks us to talk about the long-term future and structure of relations on this island. I'm reluctant to get too far into this, because the most important point for us to realise is that no progress is possible unless we first take a step back. Talk of long-term relations is empty unless we break the current cycle of growing discord. And we already know the most important thing we can do, and that is to return to the spirit and practice which delivered the peace settlement but has largely been abandoned in recent years. With the coming to office of a British leadership which seems to have little understanding or interest in anything to do with Ireland other than getting through the next big vote in the Commons, we have to understand that we are at a critical point. We need a new urgency and ambition, or we risk at best an uncertain future of growing division and mistrust. And let no one be in any doubt, Brexit is a dramatic threat. But the problem existed before Brexit. It would still exist if some miracle occurred and the Euro-hating elite of the Tory party were to wake up in the morning and reverse their 40-year-long obsession with blaming Brussels for every real and imagined indignity to their imperial vision of sovereign England. A difficult situation has been greatly inflamed by Brexit, but we simply have to understand that things were going badly wrong before Brexit. We have to deal with Brexit, but we also have to address the core underlying problems which stand in the way of a return to any progress on fulfilling the potential for a shared peace and prosperity on this island. These core problems are a growing gap between the reality of Northern Irish society and political debate, a partisan politics which has returned to emphasising getting one over on the other side, and the collapse of constructive relations between the Irish and British governments. For each of these problems, we need a genuine urgency and shared commitment to action. The evidence of a large and growing gap between political debate and the reality of today's Northern Ireland is found wherever you look. The sense of detachment from politics and disappointment in the achievement of devolved government has been tracked steadily over the years by the annual Northern Ireland Life and Times survey. This contrasts directly with similar research in Scotland, where support for the Scottish Government and Parliament's role and achievements has risen steadily. I have seen this when talking directly to people at their doorsteps and at roundtable discussions during the recent local election campaign in May as part of our new partnership work with the SDLP. The frustration from all sides of the community at the lack of the Assembly and Executive and a positive agenda was palpable. The frustration at the lack of progress on the basic bread and butter issues was obvious. Now, at one level, that frustration at the absence of discussion on bread and butter issues compared with 25 years ago could be said to at least represent some form of progress. And this frustration was particularly, I think, acute with the background of the appalling murder of Lyra McKee and a sense among the people that I met the politicians need to get back to do what they're elected to do. Personally, I think it's incomprehensible that we don't have an Assembly or an Executive and that we haven't had one when Northern Ireland is facing its greatest threat to the fabric and cohesion of its society and to its economy as well. For years, in every single piece of published research, the people of Northern Ireland have said they want to focus on the practical problems they face in relation to, for example, finding good jobs, a health service that's under constant pressure and entrenched disadvantage. Yet, even when they were operating, the devolved institutions were seen as focusing on a different agenda. Even more importantly, the growing diversity and complexity of society has not been reflected in politics. A remarkable 16% of the population of Northern Ireland was born outside of Northern Ireland. In terms of identity, the description Northern Irish, rather than Irish or British, is today the most common label chosen by people aged between 18 and 25. When the Good Friday referendum was held 21 years ago, 40% of people described themselves as unionist and 25% as nationalist. These have fallen to 26% and 21% respectively, while a full 50% of people choose their identity as neither. This is not to say that identities defined by the constitutional status of Northern Ireland have become unimportant. That's absolutely not the case. But it does show two important things. Firstly, this is not a game of demographics, where it's only about how many are born into two distinct communities and how many stay. Secondly, and more importantly, there is a large and growing middle ground, which is defined by wanting what's best for their society as a whole. And that's one of the factors that motivated our party in terms of the initiation of a new policy partnership with the SDLP to help create that new kind of centre ground. Many people are not motivated by fear, or no longer, motivated by fear of losing something or achieving ascendancy. They're open to persuasion. They reject the old binary choice of picking a side defined by history and have fully bought into the idea of wanting to live in a society which works for all. There certainly needs to be a new agenda focused on practical problems and issues, with the need for a new economic model for Northern Ireland by far the most important. There isn't enough time this evening to go into this, but as I've said in a number of speeches in Belfast, there is a desperate need for a credible new agenda for the development of Northern Ireland and indeed the border region. We need to abandon the constant fight to manage decline and replace it with initiatives which recognise the unique economic problems faced by Northern Ireland and the border region as a whole. Of course, sectarianism remains a serious issue, with 10% of people saying that they live in an area where there is a substantial paramilitary presence. But the overwhelming majority of people see progress on sectarianism over the last 20 years, and it should remind us how much can be achieved with a shared agenda. For all of this, there has been backsliding. We recently saw an election where posters were put up calling for people to finally, and I quote, get one over the clods, unquote. We've seen the Adams speech saying that the issue of equality is actually a constitutional Trojan horse, and then a senior politician indulging in vulgar abuse of Irish language and culture without any repercussions. This aggressive, community-focused partisanship has caused real damage. When the executive was still working, I said that Sinn Féin and the DUP were failing to work in a cross-community way, and they attacked me repeatedly for saying this. More recently, both have acknowledged this problem, but have, of course, said that the problems have all come from the other side. The evidence from the heating scheme inquiry has confirmed the very closed and partisan way in which the executive was operating. It is hard to see how we can have progress unless the largest parties find a way to start showing respect for each other and their electorates. And of course, the collapse in relations between the Dublin and London governments must be addressed. Every important piece of progress achieved for Northern Ireland was driven by a close and trusting relationship between the two governments. John Major with Albert Reynolds, Bertie Ahern with Tony Blair, and Gordon Brown with Brian Cowan showed just how much could be achieved when Taoiseach and Prime Ministers worked together. The decision to step back and leave things to the parties was a clear mistake from the start. The disengagement from Northern Ireland after 2011 had and continues to have serious repercussions. Northern Ireland had to fight against the idea that it was somehow sorted and needed to be treated like everyone else. The deterioration in the past 2 years has been dramatic, with the governments preaching at each other through the media and making statements which were inconceivable at any point in the previous quarter century. The constructive engagement about Brexit, evident in joint statements in 2016 and early 2017, disappeared and was replaced by a discord that we haven't seen for quite some time. When the Taoiseach said, and I quote, "It's not my job to persuade the unionists," he essentially rejected the policy of his predecessors from at very least the time of Sean Lamasse's visit to Terence O'Neill. And when the leaders of the Tory party dismissed Irish concerns about the border as irrelevant, they abandoned an approach which underpinned the search for peace over 3 decades. The accession of Boris Johnson to Downing Street quite rightly raises enormous fears for the future of relations between the governments and also London's policy towards Northern Ireland. Anyone in Dublin who met him during his time as Foreign Secretary will tell you the many ways in which he failed to show the slightest level of understanding about the operations of the Good Friday Agreement or the deep problems raised by Brexit. It is clear that he is single-minded in his ambition, but I don't think anyone can credibly say that he has thought through how to promote prosperity and reconciliation in Northern Ireland. And to be honest, no one really seems to know what his beliefs are in relation to Brexit, other than wanting to raise the flag of victory at Halloween. 3 months ago, he voted for the withdrawal agreement. Now he says it must be buried forever. He is apparently about to install a staff which is on the fundamentalist wing of the issue and full of people who have been at best indifferent to the impact of Brexit on this island. However, in spite of all of this, and the trepidation rightly felt by people who want to protect the achievements of the peace settlement, we must find a way to work with Boris Johnson. Over the next few weeks, the Taoiseach and the Prime Minister will meet to discuss Brexit. Both leaders should be reminded that this is not just a game of one-upmanship, that Brexit is far too serious to play domestic politics with. It would be a good start if there was an end to the new habit of carrying out every disagreement in public, and for both the Taoiseach and the new Prime Minister to do more than focus on the fight at hand. If they want to restore momentum to progress in Northern Ireland and plan for the day when our two countries will no longer meet regularly around negotiating tables in Brussels, there are a series of steps they could take. This is obviously in addition to delivering on the open border and trade agreed as a shared objective soon after the referendum in 2016. First, they should give their personal commitments to lead efforts to revive and reform the democratic institutions of the agreement. A reform petition of concern to stop past abuses. The creation of the civic forum promised in the agreement and intended to ensure the inclusion of marginalised communities, and a new financial settlement which proposes development rather than management of cutbacks. These are concrete steps where leadership is needed. Second, they should revive the dormant process of agreeing new North-South bodies. These bodies are purely about delivering better services for people on either side of the border, and they have disproven all constitutional fears raised about them in the past. In areas like health supports, there should be an all-island food safety authority, just one. There should be one body, as I've said before, dealing with the development and promotion of Indigenous enterprise on the island, so Invest Northern Ireland should merge with Enterprise Ireland in that respect. There should be a North-South curriculum support body to deal with complementary curriculum in English and in history. It's time we developed a shared narrative on remembrance and how we deal with history for our younger generations living on both sides of the border. There's lots we can do with the North-South agenda. It's been left languish for far too long by all involved in the process. Third, the governments must agree to stop the deterioration of relations between them and put in place a credible forum for ensuring deep and permanent contact and cooperation post-Brexit. This can't be just holding a few more meetings of existing bodies. We need a permanent secretariat and formal engagement across all of the issues which we formally dealt with in the European Union. There's too much at stake for our two islands, not just economically, but socially and politically as well. We cannot and should not let the progress of the past 21 years be thrown away. This is not dealing with reality. The risks are real and getting closer by the day. It's not Project Fear, it's Project Harsh Reality. If we can avoid a no-deal situation, and no one really knows if this is possible, we will still be faced with enormous challenges about the future relations and progress on this island and between these islands. Today is a day where we all have every right to be worried about what will happen next, but equally we have an obligation to focus on those things which we know must be done. If we return to the spirit which delivered the peace settlement, if we can develop a political agenda which reflect the reality of today's society in Northern Ireland, if we can restore basic working relations between the political leaders of our governments, if we can do these things, then we can get through this dangerous period and return to progress. And let us never forget, the challenges we faced in the past were far more serious than the ones we face now, and those were overcome. Thank you very much indeed.